So I'm going to take the part of the designer, Bates Creative, who is tasked with helping Marines, put together their digital expansion project for Q2 of this year. And Marines Magazine, you can give a little bit of backup story about their whole digital mission and their place within the DMA and how they had to completely cut out their print budget. It was like a $4 million print budget, but they have, their circulation is over 500,000, subscribers, and how are they going to go all digital without sacrificing the high quality of design? And so, their design agency, Bates Creative, has been tasked with this whole, Q2 digital expansion. So the way that Marines works with the creative agency is they create what's called a creative brief, which is basically just goes over all of the project background, the objective, and all the conditions, including the requirements, which in this case are some great photography, a tablet app, and a website and blog. So initially it looks pretty innocuous, right? So it's only one page, but as you keep going down and look at all of the details, it starts getting pretty unwieldy, and there are actually a lot of details. It gets pretty overwhelming, and when you look at the timings and revisions and everything, it actually looks like we've got an extremely tight turnaround with quite a bit to accomplish. So time is against us, and the hero in this endeavor is going to be CS6. So the first task that we tackle are the photography and the graphics. So that's when we come on over into Photoshop. I've been using Mini Bridge, and so I configure Mini Bridge. I configure the regular bridge to have, like if I go into my desktop, I've just got a Roadshow. I call it Roadshow or whatever it happens to be, and so I've got all my assets in there, and my assets are just, I just line them up like that so that I can get to them really quickly inside a bridge, right? You just drag them into your favorites, and then, when you go into Photoshop and you look in your favorites in Mini Bridge, so they're all there for you. Now this app is called Reflection, but this basically just shows me what's going on my iPad. So now I'm just going to add from my camera roll this photo. So with this, right, you've got your whole regular toolbar, and so I'm using not the scribble selection tool or the magic wand tool, but the selection brush tool, right? And notice that I've got edge aware turned on, and over here I can, touch the brush to scale up the size if I want, scale the hardness and softness up and down just by touching right there. And once you get it kind of how you want it, you touch that brush again. And so I just want to select out Greg's face. I just selected his face, right? And then you come up in here and you do Refine Edge, and you make sure that you are erasing down there and not adding. And so you just make sure that around his ear and around that hat that you're getting a little bit, right? I'm going to scale up the brush a little bit, keep going. Right, so it looks like I'm not quite going to be able to get rid of that selection piece over there unless I come in and start selecting away like that with the reverse brush. All right, there we go. Right, notice the mode is additive. So you can get very, very, very detailed very quickly on it. So I don't recommend going too bananas, just to make the point. And then what I do is I come over to the right and I his head, and I come up into the curves adjustment, and you can basically do whatever you want, but I choose curves, and I just choose a point in the curve to brighten up the highlights a little bit, and then another point in the curve to bring down the shadows a little bit. I just want him to be in a little bit better contrast, and then I turn that on and off. So then, I would do that with all of the other faces, but then I'd go back, I'd go ahead and save that project, and then with that project, I could upload it to the Creative Cloud, or I could, right here, upload to Creative Cloud, or I can, save the camera roll, share to Facebook, send by email or whatever, and I'll preserve those layers, right? And then once those layers are preserved, you can come back into Photoshop and open it up and keep working, right? And that's the beauty. So this is a CMYK tip, and I use this to show liquefy, and they're all labeled as such. So if I come up into filter liquefy, and this isn't showing off liquefy per se, it's just showing the performance. If I say liquefy, it gives me a notification that if this were RGB, it would be using the graphics processor. And since it's CMYK, I'm going to get, and so you'll see the tiling, right? See how it tiles to get in there, and then when you actually go ahead and apply the change, it's laggy, right? Like I click and it decides to move around a little bit later. As opposed to if I go up into image mode RGB, right, and I change it to RGB, so now it's really going to be utilizing the GPU. When I come back in and say liquefy, first of all, now that it's utilizing the GPU, a lot more filters are available to me. But when I click liquefy, bam, it's available and I can mess around with it at the speed of light, right? This one, I just come in and first I'll just use the patch tool, and I'll point out that we have content aware inside of the patch tool. So if I just grab this soldier and, am real careful about outlining him, and I decide I just want to patch it to some other place, so the patch tool uses the content aware algorithm to do that scene blending and filling, and it looks a lot more natural than it ever used to. Yep, and then content-aware move tool over on the left also. I just pick the guy up. Instead of patching it, you just pick him up and you move him. So with iris blur down here, right? Concept you've seen the demo. I just used this to, go into filter, go to blur, iris blur, and I'll just click right on Greg's face. Right, and make it so that it's just going to zoom right on in just to his face, and the fall off is going to be a lot, more drastic. Actually, I can zoom that in like so, zoom in like so, right? And so I play around with this a little bit just to, make sure they understand, how severe you can make it. And I also mess with the light bokeh and the color bokeh because it just, makes things a lot more extreme around the edges. And then I'll go into this guy here and make it so that his face is focused also, and everything else is out of focus, except for the individual points that we decided that we wanted. That's the one for the iris blur, and then for tilt shift blur is this guy. And nothing too spectacular here, just blur, tilt shift, and bring it down so that the center is on the ship and everything else in New York is, gets blurred out. Right, so now you get that nice tilt shift effect. And then you've seen the adaptive wide angle. The way that I like to show this is I'll reveal it in Bridge, and I'll show the, the camera data and the lens data, and I'll say that this was shot over here with a 15 millimeter fisheye lens, and that's why it has all of that distortion. And we not only recognize the camera but also the lens, because the lens is an 8 to 15 millimeter f0, and so we recognize and we can adjust using lens profile corrector if we were to open this inside of Camera Raw. So you can only open JPEGs in Camera Raw from Bridge. You can't do it from inside of Photoshop. You'll notice if I right-click that and say Open in Camera Raw in Bridge, what will happen is it should kick open the Camera Raw dialog there, right? And so we know that the camera, not the camera calibration, there we go, lens correction. So if I were to enable lens profile correction, right, and the setup is auto, the make is Canon, there we go. So if I preview the adjustment that we're doing with that lens, right, the Canon 15 millimeter lens, you'll notice that it's still not. It's really only doing a very slight amount of correction. And yeah, we can, change the distortion inside of, the camera raw dialog here, but it's still not. I mean, that those verticals are still not being really adjusted all that well. So that's why the adaptive wide-angle lens, dialog was created, because it'll take that information, right? It understands the camera and the lens, the telemetry and the curvature, the geometric distortion that's imparted by the lens, and it understands that so that you can actually straighten out those vertices, right? And so understanding the curvature of the lens will allow Photoshop to, straighten out any of those curved lines. And so, I usually go through and just make a bunch of curves, and people get it. It's not that difficult to understand. But it's just straightening out the whole thing. Right? That line still looks. So see how Photoshop still understands the lens curvature to an extent that it knows exactly what to straighten in the image to get all of the lines and parallels perfect. And if you need to even straighten that out some more, right? If you have a parallax that you want to be exactly horizontal or exactly vertical, you can say, let's call that exactly vertical, and all of the other lines will, will bend to meet that absolute vertical plane, right? Your ideate and edit on devices, faster image editing, new creativity options, right? That's the Photoshop piece. So next time we'll go through creating the tablet app, right, with the horizontal and vertical for the iPad, and also the pattern creation, for Illustrator. And we'll also go through creating the website and blog using Dreamweaver and fluid grid div layout and doing animation with Edge.
So the thing to notice about Marine's magazine is that it's now on the iPad. It's in Newsstand. Yep, up on the upper left-hand side, and so that's a function of the digital publishing suite. When you create a multi-issue application with an iTunes subscription, so you enable somebody to subscribe to your app via iTunes, should theoretically be in Newsstand by now, and they just pushed a new issue. Usually what I show is, so this is the new one with that nice kind of animation. It's like an illustrated history, 100 years of Marine Corps aviation. So this is the new one, and that animation that you just saw was created in Adobe Edge. Right, the same guy who did our Edge animation, the one that I'm going to be demoing, did this one, and I'm actually going to see if I can get this actual animation from them so that I can show it. But this is, a new kind of, this is a way to show that they have their quarterly magazine, but they also have incremental issues that go out like whenever they're ready. And so this one is kind of like, 100-year gala, but then you come back in and you see that, all of the other issues are ready. So the one that I'm using is a combination of 2011.2 and 2011.4. Those are the assets that we have. And so usually I'll just go through and do a quick view on these and just, flick around, flick to the side, show, right, here's what the ad looks like, and you'll notice that this is kind of a one-column text frame right now. We're going to use some of, InDesign's liquid layout features to make that a little bit kind of more optimized and also automate the layout because, in this magazine we have a horizontal and a vertical orientation. So notice when I change the iPad's orientation, this is vertical, and then when I change it to horizontal, so initially this took two separate files to design, right? A horizontal orientation and a vertical orientation. And so what I'm going to show in InDesign right now is the capability of taking that vertical orientation document. And so the one that I'm using is called Marines Alt Layouts _768 _start. So that'll be the first one that you open. but I've also got a couple of other files. One is called upload, _upload, and one is called _multiple. And so I'll show you what the differences are between those two, between those three. So start is obviously where you start. And so I've got that magazine and, pretty much that entire layout, right? The advertisement, the sound off, the sites. This is a portrait and profile, and then, the core shot. So if I wanted to create, it used to be I'd have to do a save as, and then call this, _H, save that in the same direction, and then change the page size, and then relay out everything. And in InDesign CS6, you have this little flyout on the right-hand side called Create Alternate Layout. And so the way to demo this is to, first show you can create an alternate layout. I've called my initial layout iPad V. So, InDesign actually understands that you're trying to make something specifically for the iPad. And so it gives you the horizontal version of the iPad. But of course, this is the iPad 1 and 2, which is 1024/768. And so the first way that I demo this is to turn all of the different page rules off, and just to show what it looks like when I create the alternate layout without any of the rules that I've applied to this page. And it looks pretty much exactly as you would expect. So when I click over here, right, there isn't a lot of difference between this method and just creating a new file and copying and pasting all of the contents, from the vertical orientation to the horizontal orientation. It's still, you still have to do a lot of work. What I've done instead of so I just deleted. So you can delete any alternate layout just by clicking up there on the affordance and say delete alternate layout, and just going back. So what I've done to kind of make it a little bit easier when I rescale the page size is applied a bunch of these liquid layout rules. So the way that you start setting those up is a combination of the page tool, which is up here. I usually just use Shift P, and so the page tool, combined with the liquid layout panel and the control panel up here, will help me start setting up rules for all of the objects. So with that page tool selected, I can start selecting objects on my page, such as this masthead up here, and I can start governing different properties of the object. So as you see, when I click on this object, I've set up some rules, and this whole page is obeying object-based rules. I can also create guide-based rules, or just have the entire, every object on the page recenter based on how I scale the page. But I'm using object-based rules right now, and that allows me pretty much the most flexibility when I'm setting up, because I can pin objects. As you'll notice, this object is pinned to the relative to the top page edge, and there are these little struts here that I can click on. In Flash Catalyst, they were called suction cups. And in Flex, they're also called suction cups. So you can basically just pin these objects to any edge, and then these these little lock icons in here, or affordances in here, allow you to impact if the object is going to scale along with the page size, which this one right now is not. Then you can lock the width and lock the height, right? So right now, this content is set. If we have a look in the liquid layout rule, it's set to auto fit. So what does that mean? If I come down with the page tool selected and move the page, so you'll notice that the object is recentering, but it's also staying pinned to the top. And it's not resizing. So the object is moving with the page, but it's not resizing with the page. However, if I come in and I uncheck those locks so that the height and the width changes with the page size, watch what happens as I scale the page, right? So let me just come back here. So as I scale the page, the width and height of that object changes. So I don't want that masthead, so I'm just hitting Command-Z a couple of times, because I don't want that masthead to scale. I like the scale that it is, especially just considering that I'm scaling the page size. But you'll also notice that that there are several other objects on the stage that I've put rules on. And so this guy right here is, the background object, and it's actually grouped, so part of it is auto-fitting and part of it is not. The part that's auto-fitting is the image behind, and I've got the height and width resizing with the page. It's not locked to any of it's not pinned, in other words, to the top, bottom, right, or left. But it doesn't really need to be since it's scaling along with the page. So as I drag the page, you'll notice that the image is growing, changing, repositioning, and auto-fitting to the frame that is scaling because I've got auto-fit turned on, right? If I didn't have auto-fit turned on, right, if I turned it completely off, what you'd see is that, yeah, the frame is scaling, the height and width of the frame is scaling, but not the content itself. So we want the actual content itself to scale, along with the frame size. And then this guy is pinned on the bottom and on the left so that when we scale this page, it moves along, right? Or it doesn't move along, and it doesn't scale or auto-fit or do any of that stuff. So basically, when we're moving around the page size down here, it won't stick unless we hold down the Alt key. And so I'm going to move this and then hold down the Alt key and let go, and now that change has been committed. But how do I know that this is exactly the change that I want? Because I want to make this page 1024 by 768. So I haven't, you can see in the width and height, I haven't exactly gotten the exact correct width. So when you drag, notice that there is there's a what's the UI name for that in the lower right that's showing me the pixel sizes? Hey, there's a meter, a pixel meter, basically, showing me the how large my layout is actually getting. So when I get to 1024 by 768, and I can be quite painstaking about this. However, if I don't want to do that, I can just come up into the control panel and set it to landscape mode, and it will automatically resize it.
Automatically.
Yep. So landscape mode, portrait mode, landscape mode. So that's kind of nice as well, right? And I can also just kind of do a quick preview right here in the control panel. What is this going to look like on a Kindle Fire with all of those rules applied, right, in the horizontal and vertical position? So obviously I'm going to have to do some resizing. But as you notice, I'm doing all of this resizing right here on my iPad V version, which is not necessarily what I wanted to do. So with all of that in mind, I'll now create my alternate, leaving my liquid page rules off. I'm going to, I could say object-based because most of them are object-based, but if you say preserve existing, then it's basically going to save it all. Now what you want to make sure that you do is link the stories, right? So the stories are basically all of the frames that have text inside of them. We want to copy the text styles into a new style group that will then so those text styles in the original source pages are duplicated, and we also want smart text reflow so that when you get overset text inside of a frame, that a new page will be generated for that text to go into, right? That's only if you have like a lot of text in a particular frame and you have a master page that you're basing it on, where the text will just flow onto that separate page. And that's called Smart Text Reflow. That's a feature of InDesign, that's been around since like CS3 or CS4. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And remember, we're going to remember all of those rules. And I've set those liquid layout rules in all 6 of these pages, but there is a little bit of adjustment. So on the cover, it just happens to work out really nicely that you don't have to do any adjustments, and it looks great. What you do have to point out, so we've basically gone from vertical to horizontal pretty perfectly, with the exception of just having to, and I just hit the V key to move this stuff up. And you notice we get the little content grabber where we can just move this stuff down a little bit, right? So we've done 90% of the work just by setting up a few rules, for our interface. Now you'll notice that originally we had a 1-column text frame here, and when we went horizontal, we set up a 2-column text frame. And we did that on this, vertical group. So I have to double-click to get in the group. And then in the text frame options. This is new in CS6. Instead of having a fixed number of columns, you actually have flexible width columns. So with flexible width columns, once that text frame exceeds a certain maximum width, right? So that you set the default width, and then if it exceeds that width, even by a partial pixel, the number of columns will go up, and the gutter will automatically be set at 12 pixels. You also want to make sure to balance the columns out, because as you'll notice, if you don't balance the columns, well, I guess these are balanced. So you can also set up auto sizing, and this is new in CS6 also, but you don't have to go into that. I think the flexible width columns is probably enough at this point for this demo. I didn't use the auto sizing at all. But so if I actually come out here and just to demonstrate, and I grab this, so when that column gets even smaller, well, so there's not enough text in here for it to really make a difference. But as you see, I make the column bigger than 300, and it automatically puts that 12 pixel gutter in there. And then, as you see, yeah, there are a few adjustments that you have to make. Maybe move this guy down in his frame a little bit. Maybe take this. So what I do for this group here is you can just hold down the Command key or the Control key on Windows. So just hold down the Control, and you can scale the frame along with the size of the font. That's like a good little tip in InDesign. Hold down Control or hold down Command to scale down the font size of whatever container you're grabbing, and hold down Shift to constrain the proportions. So yeah, there's like a little bit of adjustment that needs to be made here, right? Maybe we'll move that bracket over like so. But now with 4 or 5 keystrokes, I've gone from this layout to that layout, and it's basically perfect. We've got 2 columns of text, and it was very little work to set up, right? Same with this guy here, to the horizontal version. Just with a few, hit Shift-P, just with a few liquid layout rules to make sure that this scaled appropriately to the page size, to make sure that this did not scale and was not pinned so that it would recenter, and that this one would scale appropriately. I think this guy here, I don't even remember what rules I applied, but it doesn't matter because it's more about the storytelling around the technique that you have here. Now, where this really is probably the most powerful example of showing, okay, we've got vertical and horizontal, is when you bring in the new folio builder tools into CS6. And with CS6, you don't have to go out and download them. With the GM, they should be part of the, of the actual, build. So they're actual panels. You don't have to go out and download them. So I go, oh, there we go. Sign in. Nice. So make sure to sign in before you start your demo, always. Let's stay signed in. So this is going to show me all the, everything that's in my folio producer right now, right? All the different folios that are up on the DPS service. So the reason that I like to, so I skipped ahead to upload because it's got all of them perfectly adjusted. And now what I'm going to do is just create, like, let's say I'm at, I don't know, Pensacola. So I'd call this folio name Pensacola, right? It's going to be 1024 by 768. So new in CS6 and the latest version of the Digital Publishing Suite is Portrait and Landscape Folio. So that's really, really important because now you can upload one InDesign file and get both the vertical and horizontal orientations through one upload. It used to be that you have to do 2 uploads. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Right, and now I'm going to go ahead and add this active article right here. I'll say add, and the portrait layout, notice it'll be iPad V. Horizontal layout will be iPad H, which I've denoted up here. We'll just call this Marines Folio. I'll say OK, and now it's going to upload the horizontal and the vertical versions up into the into the folio producer. Which then, if you have time, you can talk about DPS at this point and just, talk about the value that DPS brings and how much time this used to save. I mean, uploading 2 versions of an article basically took twice as long. Creating the 2 versions of the article basically took twice as long. And, who was it? There was somebody earlier this week, I believe it was it was National Geographic, reported that it is taking them 80% less time to do production on their magazine because of exactly this, of having alternate layouts inside of InDesign and being able to upload both both orientations as one file. So they said that they're seeing 80% time savings. So now that we've uploaded that, you can just go straight to the Folio producer, and that kicks you out to your Adobe ID account. And you can do this for free, right? This is what I tell them. You can do this for free. You do not have to pay to start messing around with this. All you need is an Adobe ID and an iPad. So there's my there's my vertical version that I've uploaded, and here in the Folio producer is where I'd add my metadata and call it my Marines Folio, and also the horizontal version is there as well. So I've got both of them exactly as I wanted them, but I also only have to enter the metadata once because it's only one, set of files. That's really cool. I give it a publication name, maybe just Pensacola. Folio number 1.0. And if I wanted to flow this into my Marines Magazine app, I would click Publish and put I have to put cover previews and stuff like that. But once that's published to my particular app, notice that I've done a San Diego app and another Marines app. So I'd be happy to walk you through that later if you wanted to create your own custom app and you needed help with the iOS provisioning and all that stuff, because it is a kind of a pain. The other part is you have to have a Mac to run Viewer Builder, which is part of the demo that you're not really going to be able to show on a PC. So yeah, Viewer Builder right now is Mac only. So having Viewer Builder is kind of a part of the DPS demo. So once we've done that with the digital publishing suite, I can show them that, this is great. This 1024/768 is good for the iPad 1 and 2, but what about the, what about the iPad 3, the HD quality? And so I go to the third InDesign file, which is _multiple, and I show them that with this alternate layouts, it's not limited by, just doing horizontal and vertical. You can do layouts and have alternate, alternate content for every device under the sun, all in one file. So this is the iPad HD horizontal. As you can see, it's 2048 by 1536. And as I keep going through, I will have to, continue orienting it for that screen. But you can have pretty much everything all together in one file. So here's the Android vertical version. Here's the, Kindle Fire vertical version. And then here's down to the iPhone, the vertical version of the file. Build for the device that you think most of your constituents are going to be using first. If you think that most of them are early adopters, then go for the latest version of the latest tablet. In my experience with graphics, you always want to build the highest resolution version first, and then work down from there. So I would probably recommend, just from a graphics fidelity perspective, to build the HD version. Even though it takes the most consideration, build the HD version first and work down. One more thing that you want to highlight in this workflow that saves a crap ton of time is the fact that every article and story that you create with these alternate layouts are linked together. So the content that you're creating, if I go up and look at this in normal view, if I come on over to this, to my horizontal version, you'll see that there's a little link affordance, right? And so if I, if I wanted to have a look at that in the links panel, notice that there's wanted right down there in the links panel. But what is it actually linked to? It's linked to, if I go to source, it's linked to the original page. So if I said wanted and I change that to hunted, right? Notice that I need to update those links over here on page 2, and we even get a warning, a little affordance warning, telling me that we're out of sync with the rest. Now, if I just click that, notice it'll update to hunted, and it'll do that across the document, right?
Okay.
Like across all the different versions of the document that utilize that text frame. So that's another huge efficiency, and productivity feature for CS. But of course, when we're making these projects, we are always subjected to scope creep, and so winged in at the last minute from Bates or from DMA is that they want to create an extra page that shows some cool apparel that they're thinking about launching for fans of Marines magazine to purchase. So they have this shirt. So I just opened up Illustrator, and so here is the layout for the shirt that they want to have created, right? Which basically just shows you all about the shirt and what it's all about. It's just a little bit of jingoism. But so how are we going to create this? So as you can see, we have a camo vector object over here, and here's just a piece of that camo vector object. So in Illustrator, we've made the creation of patterns a lot easier. So I'm just going to grab this pattern just by hitting the V key and then clicking on it. And so it's easy in Illustrator to just come up and say Object Pattern Make and create a pattern. And that pattern will get added to the swatches panel. So this is what it's going to look like. You can change it 7 ways to Sunday. If I just do a simple modification and turn it into brick by row instead of grid, right, that'll change the actual layout of it. If I change the brick offset to be a little bit smaller, and I can also size the tile to the exact art and then move the horizontal spacing and the vertical spacing in. I'm just clicking in there and just hitting the down arrow key to kind of bring them together. And maybe I want to grab this guy, hold down Alt, and create another one next to him, right? Or maybe even bring one out like that and flip it around. Oops. All right, so as you can see, I can make some pretty interesting, some pretty interesting patterns. Now, grabbing all 3 of those and coming up to recolor them, right? So if I want to recolor that artwork, I can come on into, the recolor artwork dialog and just kind of move that around. One of the great parts about this dialog is when I go into edit, right? So I can just move it around and make them all red, kind of make them all purple. But I've got all of them selected right now. If I don't want to do that, if I just want to select one, then I'd come in and recolor that like so, right? Notice that the pattern changes. Maybe
Yep.
I'd grab the other one and make that, a different color, maybe make it like a green. There we go. And now when I choose all 3 of them in the recolor artwork dialog, I can spin the wheel around when I click edit. If I lock them together, then the proportions will be respected. And so I can really just kind of recolor that using the harmony, the original harmony that I created, and slide this up to make it darker, slide it in to make it lighter. So that obviously doesn't look very camo-y, so we've done a little bit of Martha Stewart. But hey, wait, where is it on the artboard? Oh, right, I have to tell Illustrator that I'm done, or I can cancel, because this is kind of a modal dialog when we're creating patterns. So I'm going to say cancel, because I don't really like that pattern. I do like this pattern, and I want to create a new swatch with it. So I'll just grab it. I've got that entire pattern, and do the same exact thing, Object Pattern Make. And now you can see when we create that pattern, it tiles very nicely. We don't have to do a lot of extra work on it. And I'll go ahead and click Done, and you'll notice up in here we've got a new pattern that's been created in our swatches panel. So if I wanted to apply that pattern just to a regular, this is just a standard block vector object, I just come in and apply it straight to just click on the swatches and apply it. But of course we have this T-shirt that we want to apply the pattern to, and also this outline. And you kind of have to mouse around to find where the outline is that you need to apply it to. But it's got the vector paths that appear like an outline. And there you go, right? And so we had a Marine's shape back there. And so that's pattern creation in Illustrator. So that's getting to both the productivity and the creativity, since Illustrator, like Photoshop, is now powered by the Mercury Performance Engine, and it's native 64-bit. It does still work on 32-bit systems. There are two binaries that get launched the same way with Photoshop. So then that brings us back to, right, we delivered content to print and devices, and we had that lightning fast creativity. So good. Then when it comes to website and blog, we're going to talk about two separate objects. One of which, and I'll give you these. Bookmarks. One of which is the site, the Marines Magazine website, which, as you can see in this web browser, is an adaptive design. So if I'm looking at it on a just regular desktop, it has this kind of this nice banner and little navigation up here at the top, and then it's got a two-column layout underneath the kind of main banner, one of which has the highlights, and the other stuff is kind of floated up to the right-hand side of the of the main column. And so that's stuff like the Twitter feed and the polls and links out to different divisions and archives and stuff like that. And then, of course, we have a footer down at the bottom. Now, if you're viewing this on a tablet in portrait mode, obviously the orientation is going to change, and you don't want the user to have to do a lot of swiping around. So this was created with responsive design in mind, using CSS media queries. And so the media queries will, once the browser has reached a certain size, it's going to push the objects in that second column down underneath the objects in the first column. So as you can see, all of the objects that were floating off to the right are now, have now been pushed underneath and are scaling appropriately. So the images inside of this banner have also scaled appropriately, and the navigation has gotten a little bit kind of bigger and easier to use than out here, right? So for the big fat 45 pixel fingers, it's gotten a little bit easier. And then as we scale it down even more, the navigation kind of comes in and is even easier to use, right? And so we continue pushing that content down under, scrolling the way that we're used to scrolling objects on a phone or a mobile device, right? So this is done using media queries, and this was created in Dreamweaver. So what I do is I just, there's a bunch of different ways to get to site management. I'll just say new site here, and I'll call it Marines Mag. And I'm just going to point to, I've got the Roadshow, Assets, Dreamweaver demo, and so I just point it right there. Right, there's my site. I don't have to do much of anything else, and I just double-click on index.html to show this site. Now what we're seeing right now are the fluid grid layouts and like all the different visual aids. So those are there to kind of help you as you're designing your sites, but I'm just going to turn those off and turn on Live View, which allows us to view our site using WebKit, because WebKit is built into Dreamweaver. And so we get, pretty much the same responsivity. In Dreamweaver CS6, we have these nice little, mobile size windows, tablet size windows, and desktop size windows. So that kind of allows you to scale, your window size appropriately. When combined with Live View, gives you, some live feedback about how your site is going to look in response to all those media queries. So if I wanted to create a new site using this kind of responsive design, what I would do is just go ahead and say File New, but instead of File New, I'd create a fluid grid layout. And so the fluid grid layout is based in columns, and it's also based in how much of the column width is going to be looked at, right? So we're going to do 4 columns for mobile, 9 columns for tablet, and 12 columns for desktop. And we want it to fill 100% of the screen in most of the cases, although desktop is only going to fill 88%. And as we saw with Marines Magazine, we had those borders on either side, those kind of pillar boxes that were we filled out. So I'll go ahead and just click Create, and we're going to create a new CSS file, and I'll just call it Grids here, and place that in my, in my site. And so by default, we're looking at the mobile view with those 4 columns. And if I keep going, right, there is our 9-column, tablet view and our 12-column desktop view. Now, the content in each one of these is exactly the same, right? So if I just say Fluid Grid Jerry Div, and I come back in, right, notice that the content is exactly the same in all 3. But what's not the same is the actual layout here. So if I went in and inserted a new div, right, a new Fluid Grid Layout div, and let's call that nav, right? So we've got a nav under here now, and that's, again, the same in all 3 because the divs are created in HTML, but how they're styled is dependent on the media query in the CSS. So let's just add a couple more here. We'll just call this column 1 and make column 2, right? Because like we had before, we had the nav, the banner, right? Maybe a header, and then we had those 2 columns. So if I want to grab column 1 for the mobile view and move it over to the to the left-hand side, so that it's only 2 columns wide, and column 2 will also only be 2 columns wide, you notice that I get this nice little affordance that will allow me to grab column 2 and float it up next to column 1, right? That's pretty nice. It allows me just like a little bit of control over the visual design. But what I'm doing right now is only being created inside of the CSS. So if I look at grids.css, you'll notice that media queries are being created inside of that CSS so that if the minimum width is 481 pixels, then all of those divs that I'm creating will obey these rules. But if it's below 481 pixels, which is how this screen is set up, it's 480 by 800, then these rules will apply for how nav column 1 and column 2 are being displayed. And so they're both being displayed with a left float, but down here they're also being displayed with a left float. So what exactly is different about them? The width, right? So the width in the 480 by 800 is 46% and 46%. Over here, each one of them is 100%. And then if the width is 769 or greater, the width is also 100%. Right? So we can see that visually by going to the tablet size and noticing, right, these divs are all 100% wide as it is on the desktop. These affordances in the boilerplate.css, right, the CSS that gets included every time you create a new Fluid Grid layout. So these are what these do is provide progressive enhancement for browsers that don't support all of the newest HTML and CSS standards. So instead of it just completely breaking in IE6 or IE7, which don't support this type of layout or don't even support media queries, it will put in CSS that that makes sense for that browser. So that's one part of it. But they wanted to do kind of a splash screen microsite, for this web page, and they wanted to do it using the latest web standards and not not Flash. So if I come on over to the Finder and I have a look, in my assets for the Edge demo, so there's yp.edge. This is the one that you're going to open up. And so if you're at all familiar with the Flash timeline, then this will make a lot of sense to you. You've got down at the lower right-hand side, you've got this scaler, which scales up your timeline. And so there's only two. We're going to make sure that the Marine's masthead actually descends into the picture, first of all, and then we're going to make sure that, you see that crosshairs, it should be moving in. Notice how it just kind of jumps very abruptly from being all the way big to all the way small. We're going to transition that and add some, add a little bit of impact to that. So you're seeing in this timeline, a whole bunch of stuff happening, but you don't actually see anything on the timeline. That's because we're using symbols, which are kind of self-encapsulated objects, the same way that you have symbols in Flash. And so to get into those symbols, you just double-click and get that same type of breadcrumbing up in the upper left-hand side that you would get with Flash. So now that I've got that breadcrumbing and I'm inside of that symbol, so now I can find all the different pieces of that symbol and click on them on the artboard, and you'll notice that I've grabbed that logo. So right now, inside of this symbol, right, which is called header, so there is only a little bit of animation, right? These two taglines are showing up, right? And I can turn those on and off right here. But the Marines guy isn't moving at all. And so we have a tween, which is called logo, down here at the bottom that we've set up. And so I'm just going to take it all the way to the end of that logo, and you'll notice that the Y property is at 312. If we just grab it, right, this is kind of scrubby text, and we move it down to, I usually move it down to like 45. Right, so that tween will have automatically been created. All I had to do is move the playhead over to that spot and change the value, and that tween's been created. But it kind of just like plops there, kind of not very, not a very exciting. I'd like it to bounce a little bit, so I can grab that, that object and come right here to the easing panel. And so I'm going to give that a little bit of an ease out, and I'm going to make this, ease out grid a little bit more dramatic by giving it an ease out back. So now you'll see that it kind of bounces. Notice how it kind of bounces and then comes back. So we're going to do basically the same thing to another object on the stage, which is that crosshairs. So I'm going to come out of that symbol by clicking the breadcrumbs to get back to the main stage, and forward my playhead up so that I get to the crosshairs. All I have to do is just double-click on the crosshairs and notice that, yes, we have grabbed that focus frame, but the only thing that's occurring with that focus frame is that the opacity is coming in. But then it just kind of like plops right there and changes out to another frame. So I want it to not only fade in, but I also want it to zoom in. So I'm going to grab it, right? I've got it selected. I'm going to come over to my Properties panel, and I'm just going to click the Scale keyframe at the very beginning. So right now it's at 300, and notice that we've gotten a Scale X and a Scale Y, and they're locked in the Properties panel right now. I'm going to move this all the way down to the end where I want it to stop, and I'm going to click another keyframe, right? Add that, and now I can drag this scrubby text down to, well, it doesn't quite make it. Let's say 100%. So there we go. So now we've created that tween, but again, it's a little bit flat, the motion of it. So I can grab the entire thing, the opacity and the scale, and add that ease out back transformation to it, and that's a little bit more true to how somebody focuses in, right? They focus down, in, and then back a little bit.
Yeah.
Right, so now that we're finished, we can just say File, Preview in Browser, right? And my browser's really small right now. Let's do that again. Right, so there, that bounced in, the crosshairs come in, and as you can see, the animation just keeps going on. So that's really beautiful. In Edge version 6, what you can do is say File, Publish Settings, and come in, and instead of publishing it out to the web, you can publish it for InDesign and DPS. And it will create a .oam file that you can drop right into InDesign, and it will, that HTML5 animation will play in your digital publication. Pretty cool, right? You can also drop it in if you're doing iBooks. You can create a .wdgt file that can be also dropped into InDesign, and that'll work inside of an EPUB 3 document for iBooks. One of the nice things to note is that this gives you the ability to decide a poster image. So when it's placed into InDesign, how do you want that image? How do you want it to first look before the user touches to start the animation? So that's a really nice touch. So that, in essence, is creating that responsive multi-screen design and the HTML5 web animation for their website and blog. And then you take the customer through, right, productivity, creativity, and design. We've seen and delivery. So we've seen a lot of productivity enhancements in getting that digital publication out the door, creativity enhancements with the pattern making tools, with all the different new filters in Photoshop, with the ability to create those custom animations in Edge with relative ease and familiarity for most Flash designers, and then delivery to HTML, to the iPad, to pretty much any device or tablet with a great deal of fluidity. That's the power and blah blah of CS6 and why we love it so much, and go buy it. The end.